It's very easy to look at Jet Li's 2004 PS2 game Rise to Honor and dismiss it as another budgety throwaway cash grab sort of game designed to bank off the martial arts star's name. Middling review scores, a front cover that sees Jet posing in what looks like his everyday attire, some early 2000s goons trying to look cool behind him, and a back cover that goes way too hard on a Times New Roman looking font. I personally always saw this game at the shops, but always passed on picking it up. It just looked cheap. But it being cheap couldn't be further from the truth. This is a first-party, big-budget, full-blown, at the time highly advertised PS2 game developed by none other than Sony Computer Entertainment of America, and playing it you can just feel the money poured into it. Remembering this came out at the beginning of 2004, it has good facial animation and lighting and particle effects and reflections and even a section showing off some fancy water physics. It's all backed up by thoughtful visual design, flowing action movie music, a good variety of locations, and a solid frame rate. Though it's obviously dated, if you like that PS2 era look, you'll love the look of this, even if Jet Li doesn't look that much like Jet Li. That's not to mention how there's plenty of well-directed cutscenes, never any loading screens while playing, and it's not easy to tell where they hid the loading, and fully mocapped animation by none other than Jet Li himself, which apparently took 6 weeks to capture. If that wasn't enough, Sony hired choreographer and director Corey Yuen, who you might know as the director of The Transporter and who worked with Lee a ton before this, to direct the game's mocap sessions. My point is, Sony bankrolled hard on this. It had been in development since at least the year 2000, it was the first game Sony showed off at their E3 2003 conference, and if you're to believe Sony at that conference, apparently Jet Li just gave Sony a call out of the blue saying he wanted to be in a video game, and off they went.
Here we are, early in the year 2000, and we're putting together a game that's based on Hong Kong action movies. Jet Li calls up Sony and says, "Hey, I'd like to be in a video game."
They also introduced Rise to Honor as a brand new franchise in that conference, but that was never to be. Now, it is a flawed game, and there is a reason that critics weren't too crack hot on it, and we'll get into that, but it's also one of those games where in every comment section and user review section of the game, there's without fail a bunch of people singing the game's praises, saying it's criminally underrated as they desperately clamor for a remaster. Seeing this love for the game is what had me personally excited to dive in and find out if it is indeed criminally underrated or not, and how it holds up today. Upon booting it up for the first time, you'll not only be impressed by the sleek presentation, but you'll be at least a bit intrigued by how the game works a little different in how it handles basic mechanics. From the outside, it looks like a stock standard button-mashing beat-em-up, but really you actually flick the right stick towards opponents to hit them, and you use the triggers to block, counter, grab, and go into a sort of rage mode which uses the ability meter. This combat was pushed really heavily in the game's marketing, advertised as an innovative 360-degree fighting system. In most of his films, Jet Li does that classic martial arts movie trope where he takes down dozens of baddies by standing in the middle of them and whacking everyone around him, whether they're behind him or next to him or in front of him. And this control scheme with these animations have been designed to emulate that. If you're targeting a guy in front of you, mid-combo you can flick the stick in the opposite direction to hit the guy behind you, which does feel good, especially when you combine it with countering and grabbing. It's punchy, responsive, and so intuitive that you'll almost immediately stop thinking about how unconventionally it controls. Since the right stick is used for fighting, camera control has been sacrificed, but impressively that's very rarely a problem and virtually never a problem during combat. The way the camera follows you through levels is both practical and, knowing full well how buzzwordy this next word is, cinematic. It's just a pleasant game to look at. Unfortunately, cracks do start to show, mainly because it's imprecise. Like, you can't really pick your moves, and while it does feel satisfying to land hits, it also feels like you're guiding Jet Li and he's choosing which moves to use. There's one counter that's a sweep kick, and it's a very effective move since it hits lots of guys at once, but it can only be used against certain enemy attacks, meaning you can't just use it whenever you want. In other games, you just press a button combination to do it, but here, because everything is a bit weird, you can't, so it feels needlessly limited. A more traditional control scheme would have fixed this, but I do like what they were going for here, and it really just needed tweaking. All the combat is limited to the R1 button, the L1 button, and the right stick, with R2 and L2 being unbound. Had they utilized those triggers to maybe account for light and heavy attacks, or differentiate between kicks and punches, or both, they could have introduced some much needed depth. You also can't touch enemies while they're on the ground, which just simplifies things further. And though there are melee weapons in the game which could add some much needed complexity, they're bafflingly way too clunky and slow to use, so it's almost never worth using them. The pick up weapon button is the same button as block, so you'll accidentally be picking up weapons all the time, which is less than ideal, and when you dual wield, things get even worse. If you're running at full speed while dual wielding, attacks simply won't register. You have to stop to attack and it feels awful. I thought this was a bug at first, but having finished the game twice with different copies of the game, both emulated and on a physical PS2, it's just how the game is. Still though, I want to emphasize that this is a fun combat system, it just doesn't need to be as simple as it is. Hand-to-hand combat isn't Rise to Honor's only gameplay pillar though, with shootouts taking up a smaller chunk of the game, and the obsession with the right stick continues here. Flick it towards enemies to lock on, never run out of ammo or even reload, and just run around amongst the chaos. They're easy spectacle sections that are again overly simple, but they're an exciting way to break up the game. You can even use your ability meter to go full Hong Kong action movie with a slow-mo max pain dive, which is as effective as it is cool. Then there's the stealth sections, taking up an even smaller amount of the game. Simple line of sight, instant game over if you're caught affairs which don't allow any margin for error and make you play exactly how they want you to. Like the rest of the game, they're very straightforward, but unfortunately, these are very, very frustrating. You move too slowly, and though the enemies do just loop back and forth over and over again, the patterns they take are often so bizarre that you actually need to wait around to watch an entire loop because they'll consistently get spooked by nothing at the same time in every loop and turn around to check on things. There's actually only 3 stealth sections in the entire game, but they're so annoying that it feels like there's more, and the final 2 are in really dull industrial type areas, which doesn't help. I actually didn't mind the first one simply because of the setting, and we got to hear some great enemy banter, including this 4th wall-breaking conversation.
It's Frankie's birthday next week. He wants that Rise to Honor game.
Oh yeah, I saw the commercial for that one. It looks really good.
Susie won't get it for him unless he gets an A on his biology final.
Buy it anyway. Frankie's a smart kid.
Susie would kill me.
What a wimp.
As the game goes on, the frustration sadly extends beyond just the stealth levels. The difficulty begins to skyrocket, and because the fighting system is so simple, it feels more like you need to exploit tricks to beat the game. I swear to God that the final goon fight was designed around you needing to figure out that you have to spam wall flips just to beat it, and the boss battles, as much as I love their character, definitely err on the side of cheap and unfair. They'll dodge absolutely everything you throw at them, so it's all about figuring out the one thing the game wants you to do, whether it's drowning them to fill up your ability meter or waiting for them to play out that one certain combo so you can get a hit in, rather than them testing your skills in any way. It's just complete trial and error. So with the game mechanically being very simple, and with it being frustrating at times, especially near the end, it's no surprise that critics weren't too crash hot on this, especially because it's only 6 hours long and it was hyped up so much. As a value proposition, buying a somewhat frustrating 6-hour long game on release simply isn't very appealing. But despite all this, I really enjoyed my time with Rise to Honor. If you're a gameplay is the only thing that matters sort of person, then stay far away. You won't like this game, and that's completely valid. However, if you're like me and you can look past these hang-ups, there is a lot to love here. There was a big push in the early 2000s to make video games that were a cinematic experience, particularly from Sony. You had the live-action PS2 adverts made to look film-like with directors like David Lynch. You had games like The Getaway removing any form of a heads-up display, upping the production with the cutscenes and borderline parodying British gangster flicks, and you had games like Ico doing the same HUDless thing and using a flowing restricted camera to look more cinematic. Rise to Honor does have a small heads-up display that you can turn off, and like I said, it does restrict camera movement to good cinematic effect, but it's the breakneck pace and barrage of cutscenes, short and long, that give it its cinematic flair. Between fights there'll be cutscenes, between stealth sections there'll be cutscenes, between levels there'll be cutscenes that jump between different locations, and again, these cutscenes are all directed well and seamlessly transition in and out of gameplay without loading, and they're spliced in such a way that they rarely feel interruptive. And really, this is where the cinematic buzzword ended up trending towards with modern AAA games, because Rise to Honor ebbs and flows more like Uncharted than anything else. There's a sentiment among fans that Rise to Honor was way ahead of its time, and I believe this is why. There's no collectibles or RPG elements or anything gamey, it's instead very linear, very handcrafted, and it just keeps moving forward. And sure, the gameplay is very simple, but that doesn't stop it from feeling good and being approachable. Like with Uncharted, which arguably also suffers from overly simple predictable gameplay, it's easy to lose yourself to Rise to Honor for a few hours. If it starts getting a little tired, it'll hit you with a new story beat or a location change or a gameplay change. There's even set PC light platforming bits just like Uncharted where you're chasing someone or running away from something, but instead of a jump button, you use the context-sensitive R1 button, which admittedly is more clunky, but it does get the job done. And it's all backed up by a fun, very typical Hong Kong action movie story where Jet is an undercover cop named Kit Yun who's assigned as a bodyguard for a Hong Kong mob boss, but once that boss gets killed, Kit must avenge his death and honor his dying wishes. Or rise to honor his dying wishes, rather. It's pulpy and silly, but the themes of family, revenge, allegiance, and of course honor all come into play in a fun way with good setups and payoffs, and all the fights and location changes are justified by the story. It's really simple stuff, but it's satisfying to follow, and it's very, very effective at getting that Hong Kong cinema vibe down. There's even a hospital sequence near the end of the movie, complete with trolley beds to ride and shoot on, just like in Hard Boiled, or in Jet Li's own movie, Black Mask. Interestingly, the game takes place half in Hong Kong and half in San Francisco, and in Hong Kong you can choose between Cantonese or English dialogue. After playing through the game twice with both, as expected, subs over dubs.
佢點啊？
打咗針食咗藥就會有啲手軟腳軟㗎啦。
佢好快會冇事嘅。今次全靠你，我會派多啲人保護你哋。How is she?
She's still groggy from the medication.
She'll be okay.
Thanks to you, I'm gonna double the man on guard.
I'd be lying to you if I said that there weren't problems with the game beyond just the gameplay. The voice acting is pretty questionable, and it's one of those games where it feels like you should be actually playing a lot of the cutscenes. Like, there's an entire sequence where you're running away from a helicopter, but then in a cutscene, Kit shoots it down. Or right at the end of the game, there could have been another final boss battle. I won't spoil the twist, but it would have been very satisfying to play. At least there's no quick time events, I guess, and the cutscenes are well done enough that it is forgivable. There's also a small handful of levels that feel visually uninspired and do drag on a bit, particularly towards the end, but they stand out more because the rest of the game is so tight and because the gameplay is so simple. Like, really, what is with video games and sewers, or at least places that look like sewers? But hey, it still moves quick enough that you know a bad level or sequence won't last too long. Weighing it all up, Jet Li's Rise to Honor these days stands as a great way to relive some PS2 era charm with more modern sensibilities. Because it predicted how a contemporary 6-hour third-person action game campaign would flow, and thanks to its technical competence and production value, it's aged incredibly well, and its unique approach to game mechanics gives it an interesting edge. It's very much the PS2 game for a busy working adult who just wants to play something quick, straightforward, welcoming, and charming to transport you back to that era, provided you have the tolerance and patience for some unfair fights. So it's not some mind-blowing or amazing game, and with its shortcomings, I can understand a lot of the critic reviews from back in the day, but Rise to Honor has a lot of heart, and I'm very glad that I played it. Even though I just beat it twice in a row, and because it's so linear it doesn't really demand replaying by any means, I can see myself returning to the game later on in life for a Jet Li flavoured, short and sweet PS2 campaign to kick back and smile at. And with that, we wrap up a review of Jet Li's Rise to Honor. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I certainly enjoyed making it and discovering this game. Thank you for watching. Hope you've been well. If you want to support the show, you can subscribe and like and hit the bell, which I know is a YouTuber thing to say, or you can support on Patreon. So this is where I thank all my patrons, including the ones coming up on the screen, and especially including Adam Beals,
Adam Davison,
Analog Man, Anthony Gallagher, Anthony Heisel, Big J, Blake Barnett, Boggy Online, Caden the Dingo, Cuggles, Devin Grandal, Dominic Chikoki, Dopants, Evil Chicken, Gary Pay, Casey, Kayla, Labcat, Lachlan Jones, Lil Jake, Lucas Raysevic, Maximilian Kunzman, May Aris Mazaki, Melanie G. Minimme is a fiscally responsible individual with a firm grasp of microeconomics within an Australasian context. Mrs. Minimme, Mustache Duct Tape, Peaceful Kumquat Plague, Reading This is a Binding Legal Contract, Ritalin for Kids, Skied Panthera, Tia, Test Drive Unlimited 2, The Last Great Opium Den, The Mighty Mega Link, Thomas Damsgaard, Traplaw Ross, Travis, Trevor Corbin, Trixie Emerson, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for supporting the show, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take it easy.